You, yes, you, the one watching, the one whom this is all about, you. You're now the main character, the vice and cousin of this video. We're talking to you, and strictly to you, because we're certain that you are very interested in this wholly beautiful mess. Oh yes, this will get tangled and mangled and most definitely wrangled, but you don't mind, do you? Well then, do you think you're ready? Aren't you burning to know what this is all about? Mysterious, but mystery we do not need. Instead, how about we show you the marvels of narrative perspective as we peek behind the fabric and building blocks of storytelling itself?
Aura es una muchacha que vive con una vieja excéntrica en un caserón casi en ruinas.
Sí.
Y en ella, ¿quién encarna realmente? ¿Cuál es el personaje que encarna ahí en sus sueños y en sus...?
Llega un personaje que eres tú. Dice, tú llegas, tú entras, tú tocas la puerta, tú, etc. Es el tú más concreto del mundo, es el tú del que tiene el libro en sus manos. Es el tú del espectador que está viendo las meninas.
Have you ever heard of the book Aura by Carlos Fuentes? The book is about you taking a job offer as a historian at a macabre house where everything is off and time is skewed. Its use of second-person narration traps you inside this environment with the rest of the characters. The narrative perspective also serves as a believable way to heighten mystery throughout the story, making it an excellent tool for keeping you on your toes throughout the read. This stuff is quite riveting. How many more times will mystery be mentioned? Now, we know you still have questions, and while keeping you in suspense is fun, we prefer to explain everything. So before this gets overwhelming, allow us. The second-person narrator is a storytelling device where the narrator directly addresses the reader or audience as you. Does this ring a bell? This narrative perspective places the audience in the center of the story, making them an active participant of the plot. It's a less common form of narration compared to the first and third person, which use I's or names and pronouns to convey the story respectively. Second-person narratives are not the same as breaking the fourth wall or having homodiegetic instances, as an academic would say, where the character suddenly realizes they are being observed and so they address their observer.
Hey, you! Get over here. A little bit closer. Oh, I know what it is. You're afraid because I'm the big bad wolf.
Homo, being Greek for same and diegetic Greek for diegesis, refer to the way the story is being told. Thus, homodiegesis is when the narrator participates in the narrated events. To detangle this a bit further, second-person narratives can be described simply as works that make you a part of the plot. You don't need to admire the hero because you are the hero. The characters interact with you, that summer fling is yours, and the villagers clamor around the village square to celebrate the hero and savior of the land, you. Second-person narration sure is a novel way of engaging with the story, but unfortunately, it is also very hard to make it work. Since the reader doesn't know where they are unless it is explicitly told to them, or what to do unless they are instructed, this narrative choice can quickly become a writing pitfall and set you up for a bland, hollow, and passive main character. It is impossible for the author to predict the emotions and thought process of all of the readers, so giving the MC some thoughts of their own comes with the risk of alienating the reader and making them think, that isn't how I would have responded to that situation. This whole book is unbelievable. Undermining the whole point of immersion, a second-person narration's strong point. What a shame that there isn't a medium flexible enough to react and adapt to the spectator inputs and choices.
Hello, Corvo. Your life has taken a turn, has it not?
Dust, dust, arise.
Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Wake up, Link.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
You discovered that there is a way to visit worlds different from yours, no longer bound by the possibilities your reality contains. This discovery happened not long after you were born, as your child self was one day thrown in front of a game console, and nothing has ever been the same. But you're not the only one. For the longest time, people all around you have immersed themselves in fantastic and fictional worlds created by mere pixels and sound bites. They other players. These worlds captivate players beyond count, making them fall in love with stories and staying with them for the rest of their lives. The characters, the scenery, details far too small to mention, and landscapes far too great to quantify, have won the hearts of many and received the highest of praises. Yet there is a certain type of game where immersion is not only a means to an end, it is the main diegetic device. The player becomes a plate, and we have come here to explain just what makes this world so captivating and why you are so enthralled in what you're playing. Baldur's Gate 3, Breath of the Wild, The Stanley Parable, Papers, Please, and Skyrim. What do all of these games have in common? Yes, that's right, all of these titles have a second-person narrative. Now, how do these games avoid set-writing pitfalls? More so, what would a flawless second-person narration game look like? Would it be one where everyone and every way of playing can feel welcome and engaging? Or would it be one whose immersive and narrative presence is so dominant it masks all of its limitations? Truth is, we don't have an answer. But what we can do is rely on the work of those before us to orient ourselves. Analyzing video games narratives will help us find paradigms or patterns in our favorite games so that we understand why we are so enthralled by them in a deeper way than only the subjective feeling of immersion. Meet Joël Jeannet. He was a French literary theorist belonging to the structuralist movement. Structuralists sought to find a hidden structure behind everything, in Jeanet's case, narrative. One of his many propositions is the divide between internal and external focalization. Is the storyteller inside or outside the story? In a game like the Stanley Parable, this question is pushed to its limits. Since the narrator reacts to the actions of the player and the player reacts to the narration, the narrator itself becomes a character in the story. This feedback loop between narrator and player is the main driving force behind the game, and we believe this is what makes this narrative so unique. One of the reasons the dynamic between narrator and player works so well in this game is because of the rupture in what Jeannet calls narrative time. For Jeannet, narrative time is indicated by the tense of the verbs, past, present, and future. In the case of the Stanley Parable, the narrator speaks in past tense to describe the way the story is supposed to be, but if the player decides to do their own bidding, the narrator reacts in present tense.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left. Now listen carefully, this is important. Stanley walked through the red door. Oh, thank God you are willing to listen to me.
This use of past tense gives the player the illusion that everything is set in stone, yet we're given the option to differ from the past tense narrative, which would mean challenging what is expected from us, and the narrator reacts accordingly. We use this game as an example because it has a very particular way of breaking or pushing narrative rules. This goes to show that finding paradigms help us create a richer and more complex narrative by breaking from the norm. Another way video games break from the norm is their approach to time. In order to progress inside a video game, you must first meet a list of requirements. Otherwise, it is impossible to progress to the next stage and, subsequently, getting to know the next part of the plot. This usually doesn't happen in other types of media. The spectator is entitled to enjoy their content in whatever order and pace they please, although different levels of freedom are allowed.
For example, in books, the reader is able to go through the words at whatever speed they please. They are able to go back a couple of paragraphs if something was not understood, or they can skip entire pages if deemed uninteresting, while still being able to get a broad idea of the work. In contrast, a theater play, a song, or a movie has defined playback speed, which, if altered, completely affects the experience.
Another reason second-person narratives feel so intimate and immersive, aside from the self-insertion done by readers, is that the narrative distance is very small. Going back to Jeannet, he argues that distance is a key factor to understanding the narrative mood. In this context, distance refers to the accuracy with which the information is conveyed. For example, if the narrator comments, "You are going down a road," to your left, you can see some houses, to your right, a park. It feels much less distant, and thus more intimate, than if the narrator was to comment simply, "You are going down a road." In video games, distance is very important for heightening immersion because your character responds to your inputs. If you want to go left, you can go left with complete precision and accuracy. No longer do main characters in second-person narratives have to be hollowed out or brainless so that anyone can relate to them. Let's take, for example, Skyrim. You are the Dragonborn tasked with saving everyone. One of the majorly discussed aspects of this game is the freedom it bestows upon you. Want to do just side quests? Sure, go speak to the NPCs. And just in case you don't know what NPC stands for, it is non-playable character. Want to advance the story? Cool, follow the main objectives. This ties in with our last point about time in gaming. While the narrative itself needs some action to be done in order to advance, the player can take as much time as they like doing it. The verticality of experience is severely restricted in video games. What we mean is that there is usually one endpoint with set story beats. In contrast, the horizontal axis gets broadened like no other media was able to do before. Maybe you cannot change the order at which the plot is going to progress, but you can definitely change how and when it's going to progress.
However, we cannot speak about the accuracy of inputs without talking about the biggest limit of second-person narratives in gaming and gaming as a whole. You will never be completely autonomous, you just have the illusion of autonomy. Depending on the game, this can be made to heighten the immersion or break it completely. For example, certain games, like Subnautica, have creative ways to keep the player in bounds and progress in the story, like a sea monster that prevents you from going in deeper water, or thick fog in which you can never advance, but get the feeling that you are. Other games don't do this so well, like Watch Dogs. They only have invisible walls that don't allow the player from going out of the bounds. This problem isn't exclusive to second-person narrative games. It is instead more of a problem of free roam or open world games, but it is way more apparent in the narrative form which we are discussing. Another limit is the production of the game itself. Time and monetary constraints can make or break immersion. This is because if you're trying to make a game as responsive and unique to every person as possible, that will mean considering a myriad of options you haven't considered before, which means thousands of new lines of code to be written, dialogue to be voiced, or animations to be done, which is expensive. At the end of the day, since it is impossible for game developers to know the patterns and behaviors of every player, naturally some players' way of thinking will not be reflected in their gaming experience. This really is an impossible problem. Even if a studio had the time and resources to explore every single available option to the player to never leave anyone out, hardware limitations could render the game unplayable, or new ways to play could be found along the way. However, these video games we're talking about, playing the game how it wasn't meant to be played is part of the experience. However, breaking the game is rarely aligned with the narrative.
Now, let us apply what we have learned. For this, we will be comparing two games, both with a second-person narrative. These games are The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild and Baldur's Gate 3. So, the first thing we will usually do is to identify the point of view. Since we know both of these games are second-person narratives, this is quite simple. We are the protagonist, so everything is seen through our eyes. We know that these games are second-person narratives because NPCs refer to us as you. Cool. The next step is to identify how the story is being presented to us. Is there any narrator? If so, are they inside or outside the story? In Breath of the Wild, there isn't a narrator. Still, the story is being told from the inside. This means that it is a homodiegetic narrative. By contrast, Baldur's Gate 3 has a narrator. We are receiving the events of the story from within, so this game also has a homodiegetic narrative. The next aspect to explore is the distance. Breath of the Wild has a way more precision when describing the events of the story, which makes it feel distant. Whilst Baldur's Gate 3 has very precise narration, which makes it feel intimate. Finally, we are going to subjectively define some aspects of both games that we are really liked, which increase our engagement and involvement. Breath of the Wild, although a marvelous game full of details and gorgeous scenery, lacks what we could define as second-person narrator. Even if the NPCs refer to you as you, the player has an innate understanding that they are not Link, the main character. Perhaps it's because the story of Link as a character Or maybe it's because the game never does anything else to establish its use of the second person. Baldur's Gate, however, has a narrator that's constantly referring to you as you, and the characters refer to you directly. This game gives you a freedom of choice that few others could rival. Plus, you are constantly reminded of your freedom to choose, and of the consequences this choice bears. Overall, we believe that the Breath of the Wild and Baldur's Gate mirror each other in a way. One gives you the illusion of choice, while the other adapts to your whims, making them true to the second-person narrative. Well, is that it? You ask yourself, unsure if all that could be said was said. And while still curious and with questions left unanswered, you ultimately decide that this is enough for the time being. You remember all that was said about second-person narration, the good and the bad, how it can immerse or alienate. You remember a small tangent about a mysterious book written in second person and some not so mysterious books that fail to avoid the pitfalls. You remember hearing about a French writer who helped define the structures of narration and seeing his concepts applied to some Stanley game. You remember time, don't you? It was asked that you keep it in mind, and yet you remembered it just now. You remember distance, and how video games compress it in a paper that margin. Is this too close for comfort? Maybe so. Having the limits isn't bad, just like video games you think. They are limited by their software and their hardware. And finally, you remember those two games we compared, and how in one of them there is no narrator, and how that isn't bad. Maybe next time we won't be here and you will be left alone with your thoughts. Still, that's not bad. Just as long as you keep learning, all is well with us. You see, at the end of the day, it really was all about you.